Welcome back to reading Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. Today we're going to be reading chapters 5, 6, and 7. Okay, hopefully that's a good height. In the course of time, Mr. Earnshaw began to fail. He had been active and healthy, yet his strength left him suddenly. And when he was confined to the chimney corner, he grew grievously irritable. Nothing vexed him. Unsuspected slights of his authority nearly threw him into fits. This was especially to be remarked if any one attempted to impose upon or domineer over his favourite. He was painfully jealous lest a word should be spoken amiss to him, seeming to have got into his head that notion that, because he liked Heathcliff, all hated and longed to him an ill turn. It was a disadvantage to the lad, for the kinder among us did not wish to fret the master, so he humoured his partiality, and that humouring was rich nourishment to the child's pride and black temper. Still it became in a manner necessary. Twice or thrice Hindley's manifestations of scorn, while his father was near, roused the old man to a fury. He seized his stick to strike him, and shook with rage that he could not do it. At last we had a curate who made the living answer by teaching the little Lintons and Earnshaws, and farming his bit of hand himself. He advised that the young man should be sent to college, and Mr. Earnshaw agreed, though with a heavy spirit, for he said Hindley was not and would never thrive as where he wandered. I hoped hardly we should have peace now. It hurt me to think the master should be uncomfortable by his own good deed. I fancied the discontent of age and disease arose from family disagreements, as he would have it that it did. Really, you know, sir, it was in the sinking frame. We might have got on tolerably, notwithstanding, but for two people, Miss Cathy and Joseph, the servant. You saw him, I dare say, up yonder. He was, and is yet, most likely the wearisomest self-righteous Pharisee that ever ransacked a Bible to rake the promises of himself and fling the curses on his neighbors. By his knack of sermonizing and pious discoursing, he contrived to make a great impression on Mr. Earnshaw, and the more feeble the master became, the more influence he gained. He was relentless in worrying him about the souls concerned and about ruling his children rigidly. He encouraged them to regard Hindley as a reprobate, and night after night he regularly grumbled on a long string of tales that Heathcliff and Catherine, always minding to Heathcliff and Catherine, always minding to flatter Earnshaw's weakness by heaping the heaviest blame on the last. Certainly she had ways with her such as I never saw a child take up before, and she put all of us past our patience 50 times, and oftener in a day, for the hour she came downstairs till the hour she went to bed. We had not a minute's security that she wouldn't be in mischief. Her spirits were always at high water mark, her tongue always going, singing, laughing, and plaguing with everybody who would not do the same. A wild wick slip she was, but she had the boniest eye and sweetest smile, and lightest foot in the parish, and after all, I believe she meant no harm, for when once she made you cry in good earnest, it seldom happened that she would not keep you company, and oblige you to be quiet, that you might comfort her. She was much too fond of Heathcliff. The greatest punishment we could invent for her was to keep her separate from him. Yet she got chided more than any of us on his account. In plays she liked exceedingly to act the little mistress, using her hands freely and commanding her companions. She did so to me, and I would not bear slapping and ordering, and so I let her know. Now Mr. Earnshaw did not understand jokes from his children. He had always been strict and grave with them. and Catherine, on her part, had no idea that her father would be crosser and less patient in his ailing condition that he was in this prime. His peevish reproofs awakened in her a naughty delight to provoke him. She was never so happy as when we were all scolding her at once, and she defying us with her bold saucy look and her ready words, turning Joseph's religious curses into ridicule, baiting me, and doing just what her father hated most, showing how her pretended insolence, which he thought real, had much more power over Heathcliff than his kindness, how the boy would do her bidding in anything, and his only when it suited his own inclination. After behaving as badly as possible all day, she sometimes came fondly to make it up at night. Nay, Cathy, the old man would say, I cannot love thee. Thou'rt worse than thy brother. Go, say thy prayer, child, and ask God's pardon. I doubt the mother, and I must rue that we ever reared thee. That made her cry at first, and then being repulsed continually hardened her, and she laughed if I told her, or say she was scary for her faults, and begged to be forgiven. But the hour came at last and ended Mr. Earnshaw's troubles on earth. He died quickly in his chair one October evening, seated by the fireside. A high wind blustered around the house and roared in the chimney. It sounded wild and stormy. Yet it was not cold, and we were all together. I, a little moved from the hearth, busy at my knitting, and Joseph reading his Bible near the stable, for the servant generally sat in the house then, after their work was done. Busy at my knitting, and Joseph reading his Bible near the table, for the servant generally sat in the house then, after his work was done. Miss Cathy had been sick, and that made her still. She leant against her father's knee, and Heathcliff was lying on the floor and with his head in her lap. I remember the master, before he fell into a doze, stroking her bony hair. It pleased him rarely to see her gentle, and saying, Why canst thou not always be a good lass, Cathy? And she turned her face up to him and laughed, and answered, Why cannot you always be a good man, father? But as soon as she saw him vexed again, she kissed his hand, and said she would sing him to sleep. She began singing very low, till his fingers dropped from hers, and his head sank on his breast. Then I told her to hush and not stir, for fear she would wake him. We all kept as mute as mice a full half hour, and should have done longer, only Joseph had finished his chapter, got up, and said that he must arouse the master for prayer and bed. She stepped forward and called him by name, and touched his shoulder, but he would not move, so he took the candle and looked at him. I thought there was something wrong as he sat down the light, and seized the children, each by one arm, whispered them to frame upstairs, and make little din. They might pray alone this evening. He had summit to do. I shall bid father good night first, said Catherine, putting her arm round her neck before we could hinder her. The poor thing discovered her loss directly, and screamed out, Oh, he's dead, Heathcliff, he's dead! And they both set up a heart-breaking cry. I joined in my wail to theirs, loud and bitter, but Joseph asked what we could be thinking of to roar in that way over a saint in heaven. He told me to put on my cloak and run to Gimmerton for the doctor and the parson. I could not guess the use that either would be of then. However, I went through wind and rain and brought one, the doctor, back to me. The other said he would come in the morning. Leaving Joseph to explain matters, I ran to the children's room. Their door was ajar. I saw that they had never laid down, though it was past midnight, but they were calmer and did not need me to console them. Their little souls were comforting each other with better thoughts than I could have hit on. No parson in the world would have pictured heaven so beautiful as they did in their innocent talk. And when I sobbed and listened, I could not help wishing we were all there safe together. Chapter 6. Chapter 6. Mr. Henley came home to the funeral, and a thing that amazed us and set the neighbors gossiping right and left, he brought a wife with him. What she was and where she was born he never informed us. Probably she had neither money nor name to record her, or he would scarcely have kept the union from his father. She was not one that would have disturbed the house much on her own account. Every object she saw the moment she crossed the threshold appeared to delight her, and every circumstance that took place about her, except for preparing for the burial and the presence of the mourners, I thought she was half silly from her behavior. While that went on, she ran into her chamber and made me come with her, though I should have been dressing the children. And there she sat, shivering and clasping her hand and asking repeatedly, "Are they gone yet?" Then she began describing with hysterical emotion the effect it produced on her to see black, and started and trembled, and at last fell a weeping. Then when I asked what was the matter, I answered she didn't know, but she felt so afraid of dying. I imagined her a little likely to die as myself. She was rather thin, but young and fresh-complexioned, and her eyes sparkled as bright as diamonds. I did remark, to be sure, that mounting the stairs made her breath very quick, and the least sudden noise set her all in a quiver, and that she coughed troublesomely sometimes. But I knew nothing of what these symptoms portended, and had no impulse to sympathize with her. We don't, in general, take to foreigners here, Mr. Lockwood, unless they take to us first. Young Earnshaw was altered considerably in the 3 years of his absence. He had grown sparer and lost his color, and spoke and dressed quite differently, and on the very day of the reunion, he told Joseph and me we must henceforth quarter ourselves in the back kitchen, and leave the house for him. Indeed, he would have carpeted and papered a small spare room for a parlor. Then his wife expressed such pleasure at the white floor and huge glowing fireplace, and the pewter dishes and delf case and dog kennel, and the wide space there was to move about in, where they usually sat, that he thought it unnecessary to her comfort, and so dropped the intention. She expressed pleasure, too, at finding a sister among her new acquaintance, and she prattled to Catherine, and kissed her, and ran about with her, and gave her a quantities of presents at the beginning. Her affection tired very soon, however, and when she grew peevish, Hindley became tyrannical. A few words from her, evincing a dislike to Heathcliff, were enough to rouse in him all the old hatred of the boy. He drove him from their company to the servants, deprived him of the instructions of the curate, and insisted that he should labor out of doors instead, compelling him to do so as hard as any other lad on the farm. She expressed pleasure. He bore his degradation pretty well at first, because Kathleen taught him what she learned, and worked or played with him in the fields. They both promised fair to grow up as rude savages, the young master being entirely negligent how they behaved and what they did, and so they kept clear of him. She would not even have seen, after their going to church on Sundays, that Joseph and the curate reprimanded his carelessness when they absented themselves, and reminded him to order Heathcliff a flogging, and Catherine a fast from dinner or supper. but it was one of the chief amusements to run away to the moors in the morning and remain there all day, and the after punishment grew a mere thing to laugh at. The curate might set as many chapters as he pleased for Catherine to get by heart, and Joseph might thrash Heathcliff till his arm ached. They forgot everything the minute they were together again at least the minute they had contrived some naughty plan of revenge. More reckless daily, and many a time I've cried to myself to watch them growing more reckless daily, and I'd not, darling, to speak a syllable for fear of losing the small power I still retained over the unfriendly centuries. One Sunday evening it chanced that they were banished from the sitting room from where a noise or a light office or the kind, and when I went to call the supper, I could discover them nowhere. We reached the house above and below, and the yard and stables. They were invisible. And at last Hindley, in a passion, told us to bolt the doors, and swore nobody should let them in that night. The household went to bed, and I, too anxious to lie down, opened my lattice and put my head out to hearken, though it rained, determined to admit them in spite of the prohibition. Should they return in a while, I distinguished steps coming up the road, and the light of a lantern glimmered through the gate. I threw a shawl over my head and ran to prevent them from awaking Mr. Earnshaw by knocking. There was Mr. Heathcliff, by himself. I gave me a start to see him alone. "Where is Miss Catherine?" I cried hurriedly. "No accident, I hope." "Ah, Thrushcross Grange," he answered, and I would have been there too, but they had not the manner to ask me to stay. "Well, you will catch it," I said. "You'll never be content till you're sent about your business. What in the world led you wandering to Thrushcross Grange?" "Let me grip off my wet clothes, and I'll tell you all about it, Nelly," he replied. I bid him beware of rousing the master, and while he undressed and I waited to put out the candle, I continued. "Kathleen and I escaped from the wash house to have a ramble at liberty, and getting a glimpse of the Grange lights, we thought we would just go and see whether the Lintons passed their Sunday evenings standing shivering in corners, while their father and mother eat everything and drinking and singing and laughing and burning their eyes out before the fire. Do you think they do, or reading sermons and being catechized by their manservant and set to learn a column of scripture names if they didn't answer properly?" "Probably not," I responded. "They are good children, no doubt, and they don't deserve this treatment you receive for the bad conduct." "Don't you can't, Nelly," he said. "Nonsense." We ran from the top of the heights to the park without stopping, Catherine completely beaten in the race before she was barefoot. "You'll have to seek for her shoes in the bog tomorrow." We crept through a broken hedge, groped our way up the path, and planted ourselves on a flower pot under the drawing-room window. The light came from thence. They had not put up the shutters, and the curtains were only half closed. Both of us were able to look in the standing on the basement and clinging to the ledge, and we saw, it was beautiful, a splendid place, carpeted with crimson-covered chairs and tables, and a pure white ceiling bordered by gold, a shower of glass drops hanging in silver chains from the center, and shimmering with little soft tapers. Old Mr. and Mrs. Linton were not there. Edgar and his sister had it entirely to themselves. Shouldn't they have been happy? And why we should have thought ourselves in heaven. And now, guess what your good children, are doing. Isabella, I believe she was 11, a year younger than Kathy, lay screaming at the farther end of the table, shrieking as if witches were running red-hot needles into her. Edgar stood on the hearth. Sweeping silently in the middle of the table sat a little dog, shaking his paw and yelping. which from their mutual accusation we understood they had nearly pulled in two between them. The idiots! That was their pleasure, to quarrel who should have a heap of warm hair, and each begin to cry, because both, after struggling to get it, refused to take it. We laughed outright as we at the petted thing. We did despise them. When would you catch me wishing to have what Catherine wanted, or find us by ourselves seeking entertainment in yelling and sobbing and rolling on the ground divided by the whole room? I had not exchanged for 1,000 lives my condition here for Edgar Linton's at Thrushcross Grange, not if I might have the privilege of flinging Joseph off the highest gable and painting the house front with Hindley's blood. Hush, hush, I interrupted. Still you have not told me, Heathcliff, how Catherine is left behind. I told you we laughed, he answered. The Lintons heard us, and with one accord they shot like arrows to the door. There was silence, and then a cry, "Oh, Mamma, Mamma, oh, Papa, oh, Mamma, come here, oh, Papa, oh." They really did howl out, something in that way. We made frightful noises to terrify them still more, and then we dropped off the ledge because someone was drawing the bars, and we felt we had better flee. I had Kathy by the hand and was urging her on, and when all at once she fell down. "Run, Heathcliff, run," she whispered. "They have let the bulldog loose, and he holds me." The devil had seized her ankle. Nellie, I heard his admirable snorting. She did not yell out, no. She would have scorned to do it if she had been spitted on the horns of a mad cow. I had thought I vociferated curses enough to annihilate any fiend in Christendom, and I got a stone and thrust it between his jaws and tried with all my might to cram it down his throat. A beast of a servant came up with a lantern at last, shouting, "Keep fast, Skulker, keep fast." He changed his note, however, when he saw Skulker's game. The dog was throttled off, his huge purple tongue hanging half a foot out of his mouth, and his pendant lips streaming with blood slaver. The man took Kathy up. She was sick, not from fear, I'm certain, but from pain. He carried her in. I followed, grumble, exaggeration, and vengeance. "What, pray, Robert?" hallooed Linton from the entrance. "Skulker has caught a little girl, sir," he replied, "and there's a lad here," he added, making a clutch at me, "who looks an out and outer. Very like the robbers were for putting them through the window to open the doors and to the gang after all were asleep, that they might murder us at their ease. Hold your tongue, you foul-mouthed thief, you! You shall go to the gallows for this. Mr. Linton, sir, don't lay by your gun." "No, no, Robert," said the old fool. "The rascal knew that yesterday was my rent day. They thought to have me cleverly. Come in, I'll furnish them a reception. There, John, fasten the chain. Give Skulker some water, Jenny. To beard a magistrate in his stronghold, and on the Sabbath too. Where will their insolence stop? Oh, my dear Mary, look here. Don't be afraid. It is but a boy. Yet the villain scowls so painfully in his face. Would it not be kindness to the country to hang him at once before he shows his nature and acts as well as features?" He pulled me under the chandelier, and Mrs. Linton placed her spectacle on her nose, and raised her hand in horror. The cowardly children crept nearer also, Isabella lisping, "Frightful thing. Please, put him in the cellar, Papa. He's exactly like the son of the fortune-teller that stole the same pheasant, isn't he, Edgar? Stole my tame pheasant." While they examined me, Kathy came around. She heard the last speech and laughed. Edgar Linton, after inquisitive stare, collected sufficient wit to recognize her. "They see us at church, you know, though we seldom meet from elsewhere. That's Miss Earnshaw," he whispered to his mother. "And look how Skulker her bittern hair. Look at how Skolton has bitten her, how her feet bleeds. Miss Earnshaw, nonsense, cried the dame. Miss Earnshaw scouring the country with a gypsy, and yet, my dear, the child is in mourning, surely it is, and she may be lamed for life. What culpable carelessness in her brother, exclaimed Mr. Linton, turning from me to Catherine. I've understood from Childers, that was the curate, sir, that he lets her grow up in absolute heathenism. But who is this? Where did she pick up this companion? Oh ho! I declare he is that strange acquisition my late neighbor made in his journey to Liverpool, a little Lascar, or an American or Spanish castaway. A wicked boy at all events, whispered the old lady, and quite unfit for a decent house. Did you notice his language, Linton? I'm shocked that my children should have heard it. I recommenced cursing. Don't be angry, Nellie. And so Robert was ordered to take me off. I refused to go without Kathy. He dragged me into the garden, pushed the lantern into my hand, assured me that Mr. Earnshaw should be informed of my behavior, and bidding me march directly, secured the door again. The curtains were still looped up at one corner, and resumed my station as spy, because, if Catherine had wished to return, I intended shattering the great glass pane to a million fragments unless they let her out. She sat on the sofa quietly. Mrs. Linton took off her grey cloak of the grey cloak of the diary maid, which we had borrowed from our excursion, shaking her head and expostulating with her. I suppose she was a young lady, and they made a distinction between her treatment and mine. Then the woman servant brought a basin of warm water and washed her feet. Mr. Linton mixed a tumbler of negus, and Isabella emptied a plateful of cakes into her lap, and Edgar stood gaping at a distance. Afterward, they dried and combed her beautiful hair, and gave her a pair of enormous slippers, and wheeled her to the fire, and I left her as merry as she could be, dividing her food between the little dog and Skulker, whose nose she pinched as he ate, kindling a spark of spirit in the vacant blue eyes of the Lintons, a dim reflection from her own enchanting face. I saw they were full of stupid admiration. She is so immeasurably superior to everybody on earth, is he not, Nellie? There will more come of this business than you reckon on, I answered, covering him and extinguishing the light. You are incurable, Heathcliff, and Mr. Hindley will have to process extremities. See if he won't. My words came truer than I desired. The luckless adventure made Earnshaw furious, and then Mr. Linton, to mend matters, paid us a visit himself on one morrow, and read the young master such a lecture on the road he guided his family that he was stirred to look about him in earnest. Heathcliff received no flogging, but he was told that the first word he spoke to Miss Catherine should ensure a dismissal. And Mrs. Earnshaw undertook to keep her sister-in-law in due restraint when she returned home, employing art, not force. With force she would have found it impossible. Chapter 7. Chapter 7. Kathy stayed at Thrushcross Grange 5 weeks, till Christmas. By that time her ankle was thoroughly cured, and her manners much improved. The mistress visited her often in the interval, and commenced her plan of reform by trying to raise her self-respect with fine clothes and flattery, which she took readily, so that, instead of a wild, hatless little savage jumping into the house and rushing to squeeze us all breathless, there lightened from a handsome black pony, a very dignified person, with brown ringlets falling from the cover of a feathered beaver, and a long cloth habit which she was obliged to hold up with both hands that she might sail in. Hindley lifted her from her horse, exclaiming delightedly, "Why, Kathy, you are quite a beauty. I should scarcely have known you. You look like a lady now. Isabella Linton is not to be compared with her, is she, Francis?" "Isabella has not her natural advantages," replied his wife, "but she must mind and not grow wild again here. Ellen, help Miss Catherine off with her things. Stay, dear, will you will disarrange your curls. Let me unite and untie your hat." I removed the habit, and there shone forth beneath a grand plaid silk frock, white trouser, and burnished shoes, and while her eyes sparkled joyfully when the dogs came bounding up to welcome her, she dared hardly touch them lest they should fawn upon her splendid garments. She kissed me gently. I was all flour making the Christmas cake, and it would not have done to give me a hug. And then she looked round for Heathcliff. Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw watched anxiously their meeting, thinking it would enable them to judge in some measure what grounds they had for hoping to succeed in separating the two friends. Heathcliff was hard to discover at first. If he were careless and uncared for before Catherine's absence, he had been 10 times more so since. Nobody but I even did him the kindness to call him a dirty boy, and bid him wash himself once a week, and children of his age seldom have a natural pleasure in soap and water. Therefore, not to mention his clothes, which had seen 3 months' service in mire and dust, and his thick, uncombed hair, the surface of his face and hands were dismally beclouded. He might well skulk behind the settle on beholding such a bright, graceful damsel enter the house, instead of a rough-headed counterpart to himself, as she expected. Is Heathcliff not here?" she demanded, pulling off her gloves and displaying fingers wonderfully white into doing nothing and staying indoors. "Heathcliff, you may have come forward," cried Mr. Hindley. "You may come forward," cried Mr. Hindley, enjoying his discomfiture and gratified to see what a forbidding young blackguard he would be compelled to present himself. "You may come, and you wish Miss Catherine welcome, like the other servants." Kathy, catching a glimpse of her friend in concealment, flew to embrace him. She bestowed 7 or 8 kisses on his cheek within the second, and then stopped, and drawing back, burst into a laugh, exclaiming, "Why, how very black and cross you look, and how funny and grim! But that's what I'm used to, Edgar and Isabella Linton. But that's because I'm used to Edgar and Isabella Linton. Well, Heathcliff, have you forgotten me? She had some reason to put the question, for shame and pride threw double gloom over his countenance, and kept him immovable. "Shake hands, Heathcliff," and Mr. Earnshaw "Shake hands, Heathcliff," said Mr. Earnshaw condescendingly. "Once in a way that is permitted." "I shall not," replied the boy, finding his tongue at last. "I shall not stand to be laughed at. I shall not bear it." And he would have broken from the circle when Miss Cathy seized him again. "I did not mean to laugh at you," she said. "I could not hinder myself. Heathcliff, shake hands at least. What are you sulky for? It was only that you looked odd. If your face were brushed and you brush your hair, you might be all right. But you are so dirty." She gazed concernedly at the dusky fingers she held in her own, and asked at her dress. and also at her dress, which she feared had gained no embellishment from its contrast with his. "You needn't have touched me," he answered, following her eyes, and snatched away her hand. "I shall be dirty as I please, and then I like to be dirty, and I will be dirty, and I like to be dirty, and I will be dirty." With that, he dashed head foremost out of the room amid the merriment of the master and mistress, and to the serious disturbance of Catherine, who could not comprehend how her remarks should have produced such an exhibition of bad temper. And playing lady's maid to the newcomer, and putting my cakes in the oven, and making the house and kitchen cheerful with great fires befitting Christmas Eve, I prepared to sit down and amuse myself by singing carols all along, regardless of Joseph's affirmations that he considered the merry tones I chose the next song to song. I chose as next door to songs. Merry tunes. He had retired to private prayer in his chamber, and Mr. and Mrs. Earnshaw were engaging Missy's attention by sundry gay trifles bought for her to present to the little Lintons as an acknowledgment of their kindness. They had invited them to spend the morrow at Wuthering Heights, and the invitation had been accepted on one occasion. Mrs. Linton begged that her darling might be kept carefully apart from the naughty, swearing boy. Under the circumstance, I remained solitary, smelt the rich scent of the heating spices, and admired the shining kitchen utensils, the polished clock decked in holly, the silver mugs ranged on a tray ready to be filled with mulled ale for supper, and above all, the speckless purity of my particular care, the scoured and well-swept floor. I gave what due inward applause to each object, and then I remembered how old Earnshaw used to come in when all was tidied, and call me a cantless, and slip a shilling into my hand as a Christmas box. And from that I went on to think of his fondness for Heathcliff, and his dread lest he should suffer neglect after death had removed him, and that naturally led me to consider the poor lad's situation now, and from singing I changed my mind to crying. It struck me soon, however, there would be more sense in endeavouring to repair some of his wrongs than shedding tears over them. I got up and walked into the court to see him. He was not far. I found him smoothing the glossy coat on the new pony on the table, and feeding the other beasts according to custom. "Make haste, Heathcliff," I said, "the kitchen is so comfortable, and Joseph is upstairs. Make haste, and let me dress your smart before Miss Cathy comes out." "And then you can sit together with the whole hearth to yourself, and have a long chatter till bedtime." He proceeded with his task, and never turned his head toward me. Are you coming?" I continued. "There's a little cake for each of you, nearly enough, and you'll need half an hour's dawning." I waited 5 minutes, but getting no answer left him. Catherine supped with her brother and sister-in-law. Joseph and I joined at an unsociable meal, seasoned with pre-proofs on one side and sauciness on the other. His cake and cheese remained on the table all night for the fairies. He managed to continue work till 9 o'clock, and then marched dumb and dour into his chamber. Cathy sat up late, having a world of things to order for the reception of her new friend. She came into the kitchen once to speak to her old one, and he was gone, and she only stayed to ask what was the matter with him, and then went back. In the morning he rose early, and, as it was a holiday, carried his ill humour onto the moors, not reappearing till the family was departed for church. Fasting or reflection seemed to have brought him a better spirit. He hung about me for a while, and having screwed up his courage, exclaimed broadly, "Nellie, make me decent. I'm going to be good." High time, Heathcliff, I said. You have, breathed Catherine. She's sorry she'd ever came home, I dare say. It looks as if you were envied her because she is more thought of you than you. More thought of than you. The notion of envying Catherine was incomprehensible to him, but the notion of grieving her he understood clearly enough. Did she say she was grieved? He inquired, looking very serious. She cried when I told her you were off again this morning. Well, I cried last night, he returned, and I had more reason to cry than she. Yes, you had the reason of going to bed with a proud heart and an empty stomach, I said. Proud people breed sad sorrows for themselves, but if you should be ashamed of your techniques, you must ask pardon. Mine when she comes in. You must go up and offer to kiss her and say you thought best what to say, only do it heartily and not as if you thought her converted into a stranger by her grand dress. And now, though I have dinner to get ready, I'll steal time to arrange you so that Edgar Linton shall look quite a doll beside you, and that he does. You are younger, and yet I'll be bound you are taller and twice as broad across his shoulders. You could knock him down in a twinkling. Don't you feel that you could? Heathcliff's face brightened a moment. Then it was overcast afresh as he sighed. But, Nellie, if I knocked him down 20 times, that wouldn't make him less handsome or me more so. I wish I had light hair and a fair skin, and was dressed and behaved as well, and had a chance of being as rich as he will be. And cried for Mamma at every turn, I added, and trembled if a country had heaved his fist against you, and sat at home all day for a shower of rain. Oh, Heathcliff, you are showing a poor spirit. Come to the glass, and I'll let you see what you should wish. Do you mark those two lines between your eyes, and those thick brows that instead of rising arched sink in the middle, and that couple of black fiends so deeply buried that never open their windows boldly, but lurk glintering under them like devil's spies? Wish and learn to smooth away the surly wrinkles, to raise your lids frankly and change the fiends to confident, innocent angels, suspecting and doubting nothing, and always seeing friends where they are sure not to be foes. Where they are not sure of foes. Don't get the expression of a vivacious cur that appears to know the kick it gets. That it gets are its desert, and yet hated all the world as well as the kicker for what it suffers. In other words, I must wish for Edgar Linton's great blue eyes and even forehead. He replied, I do, and that won't help me to them. A good heart will help you to a bonny face, my lad, I continued. If you're a regular black, and a bad one will turn the boniest into something worse than ugly. And now what we've done washing and combining and soaking, tell me whether you don't think yourself rather handsome. I'll tell you I do. You're fit for a prince in disguise, who knows? But your father was Emperor of China, and your mother was Mother and Indian Queen. Each of them was able to buy up with 1 week income Wuthering Heights and Thrushcross Grange together. And you were kidnapped by wicked soldiers and brought to England, where I, in your place, I would fame high notion of my birth, and the thoughts of what I was should give me courage and dignity to support the oppression of a little farmer. So I chattered on, and Heathcliff gradually lost his frown and began to look quite pleasant when all at once, our conversation was interrupted by a rumbling sound moving up the road and entering the court. He ran to the window, and I to the door, just in time to behold the two Lintons descending from the family carriage, smothered in cloaks and furs, and the Earnshaws dismounted from their horses. They often rode to church in winter. Catherine took a hand of each of the children and brought them into the house and set them before the fire, which quickly put color into their white faces. I urged my companion to hasten now and show her his amiable humor, and he willingly obeyed. But ill luck would have it that as he opened the door leading to the kitchen on one side, Hindley opened it on the other. They met, and the master, irritated at seeing him clean and cheerful, or perhaps eager to keep his promise to Mrs. Linton, shoved him back with a sudden thrust, and angrily bade Joseph keep the fellow out of the room. Send him to the garret till dinner is over. He'll be cramping with his fingers in the tarts and stealing the fruit if left alone with them a minute. Nay, sir, I could not avoid answering. He'll touch nothing, not he, and I suppose he must have his share of the dainties as well as we. He shall have his share of my hand if I catch him downstairs again till dark, cried Hindley. Begone, you vagabond. What, you are attempting to coxcomb, are you? What, wait till I get hold of those elegant locks. See if I won't pull them a bit longer. They are long enough, observed Master Linton, peeping from the doorway. I wonder they won't make his head ache. It's like a colt's mane over his eyes. He ventured this remark without any intention of insult, but Heathcliff's violent nature was not prepared to endure the appearance of impetuance from one of those who seemed to hate. Even then, as a rival, he seized a tureen of hot applesauce, the first thing that came under his grip, and dashed it against the speaker's face and neck, who instantly commenced a lament that brought Isabel and Catherine hurrying over to the place. Mr. Earnshaw snatched up the culprit directly and conveyed him to his chamber, where doubtless he administered a rough remedy to cool the fit of passion, for he reappeared red and breathless. I got the dishcloth and rather spitefully scrubbed Edgar's nose and mouth, affirming it served him right for meddling. His sister began weeping to go home, and Kathy stood by, confounded, blushing for all. You should not have spoken to him, she expostulated with Mr. Linton. He was in bad temper, and now you've spoilt your visit, and he'll be flogged. I hate him to be flogged. I can't eat my dinner. Why did you speak to him, Edgar? I didn't, sobbed the youth, escaping from my hands and finishing the remainder of the purification with his cambric pocket handkerchief. I promised Mama that I wouldn't say one word to him, and I didn't. Well, don't cry, replied Catherine contemptuously. You're not killed. Don't make more mischief. My brother is coming. Be quiet. Give over, Isabel. Has anybody hurt you? There, children, to your seats, cried Hindley, bustling in. The brute of a lad has warned me nicely. Next time, Master Edgar, take the law into your own fists. It will give you an appetite. The little party recovered its equanimity at sight of the fragrant feast. They were hungry after their ride and easily consoled, though since no real harm had fallen them. Mr. Earnshaw carved bountiful platefuls, and the mistress made them merry with lively talk. I waited behind her chair and was pained to behold Catherine, with dry eyes and an indifferent air, commence cutting up the wing of a goose before her. An immense unfeeling child. I thought to myself how lightly this dismissed her old playmate's troubles. I could not have imagined her to be so selfish. She lifted a mouthful through her lips, then she sat down again, her cheeks flushed, and the tears gushed all over them. She slipped her fork to the floor and hastily dove under the cloth to conceal her emotion. I did not call her unfeeling long, for I perceived what she was doing in purgatory throughout the day and worrying to find an opportunity of getting by herself or paying a visit to Heathcliff, who had been locked up by the master, as I discovered on endeavors to introduce a private mess of victuals. In the evening we had a dance. Kathy begged that he might be liberated then, as Isabel Linton had no partner. Her entries were vain, and I was appointed to supply the deficiency. We got rid of all gloom in the excitement of the exercise, and our pleasure was increased by the arrival of the Gimmerton band, mustering 15 songs, trumpet, trombone, clarinet, bassoons, French horns, and bass viola, besides singers. They got the rounds of all the respectable houses and received contributions every Christmas, and we esteemed it a first-rate treat to hear them after the usual carols had been sung. We sat them to sound and glee. Mr. Earnshaw loved the music, and so he gave us plenty. Catherine loved it too, but she said it sounded sweetest at the top of the steps, and she went up in the dark. I followed. They shut the house door below, never noting our absence. It was so full of people. She made no stay in the stairs head, and mounted farther to the garret, where Heathcliff was confirmed, and called him. He stubbornly declined without answering for a while. She persevered, and finally persuaded him to hold communication with her through the bound. I let the poor things converse unmolested till I suppose the songs were gone to cease, and the singers to get some refreshment. Then I clambered up the ladder to warn her. Instead of finding her outside, I heard her voice within. The little monkey had crept by the skylight of one garret, along the roof, into the skylight on the other side, and it was the utmost difficult coax her out again. It was with utmost difficulty I could coax her out again. When she did come, Heathcliff came with her. She insisted that I should take him into the kitchen, as my fellow servant had gone to a neighbor's to be removed from the sound of the devil's psalmody, as it pleased him to call it. I told them I intended by no means to encourage her tricks, but as the prisoners had never broken their feast since yesterday's dinner, I would wink at his cheating Mr. Hindley that once. He went down. I set him a stool by the fire and offered him a quantity of good things, but he was sick and could eat little, and my attempts to entertain him were thrown away. He leaned in with elbows on his knees and his chin on his hands, and remained wrapped in dumb meditation. On my inquiring the subject of his thoughts, he answered gravely, trying to settle how I should play Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait. If I can only do it, it'll all last. I hope he will not die before I do. For shame, Heathcliff, said I. Here to to punish wicked people. We should not learn to forgive. No, God wouldn't have the satisfaction that he'll return. I only wish I knew the best way. Let me alone and I'll plan it out. While I'm thinking of that, I don't feel pain. Mr. Lockwood, I forgot these tales cannot divert you. I am annoyed below. I should dream of chatting on at such a rate. And your gruel cold. At such a rate. And you grew cold, and you're nodding for bed. I could have told Heathcliff's history, all that you need to hear, in half a dozen words. Thus interrupting herself, the housekeeper rose and proceeded to lay aside her sewing, but I felt incapable of moving from the hearth, as I was very far from nodding. Sit still, Mrs. Dean, I cried. Do sit still another half hour. You've done just right to tell the story leisurely. This is the method I like, and you must finish in the same style. I am interested in every character you have mentioned, more or less. The clock is on the stroke of 11, sir. No matter, I'm not accustomed to go to bed in a long hour. 1 or 2 in the morning enough for a person who lies till 10. You shouldn't lie till 10. There's the very prime of the morning gone long before that time. A person who has not done one half his day's work by 10 o'clock runs a chance of leaving the other half undone. Nevertheless, Mrs. Dean, resume your chair, because tomorrow I intend lengthening the night till afternoon. I prognosticate for myself an obstinate cold, at least. I hope not, sir. Well, you must allow me to leap over some 3 years during that space. Mr. Earnshaw, no, I'll allow nothing of the sort. Are you acquainted with the mood of mind in which, if you were seated alone and the cat licking its kitten on the rug before you, you would watch the operation so intently that puss's neglect of one ear would put you seriously out of temper? A terribly lazy mood, I should say. On the contrary, tiresomely active one. It is mine at present, and therefore continue minutely. I perceive that people in these regions acquire over people in towns the value that a spider in a dungeon does over a spider in a cottage to the various occupants, and yet the deepened attraction is not entirely owing to the situation of the looker-on. They do live more in earnest, more in themselves, and less in surface change and frivolous external things. I could fancy the love for life here almost possible, and I was a fixed unbeliever in any of the year's understanding. One state resembles setting a hungry man down to a single dish on which he may concentrate his entire appetite and do it justice. The other, introducing him to a table laid out by French cooks. He can perhaps extract as much enjoyment from the whole, but each part is a mere atom in his regard and remembrance. Oh, here we are, the same as anywhere else. That when you got to know us, observed Mrs. Dean, somewhat puzzled at my speech. Excuse me, I responded. You, my good friend, you are a striking evidence against that assertion. Excepting a few provincialisms of slight consequence, you have no marks of the manner that I am habituated to consider as peculiar to your class. I am sure you have thought a great deal more than the generality of servants think. You have been compelled to cultivate your reflective faculties for want of occasions for frittering your life away in silly trifles. Mrs. Dean laughed. I certainly esteem myself a steady, reasonable kind of body, she said, not exactly from living among the hills and steering one set of faces and one series of action from year's end to year's end, but I have undergone sharp discipline, which has taught me wisdom, and then I have read more than you would fancy, Mr. Lockwood. You could not open a book in this library that I have not looked into, and got something out of also, unless it be the range of Greek and Latin, and that of French, and those I know one from another. It is as much as you can expect from a poor man's daughter. However, I am to follow my story in true gossip's fashion. If I am to follow my story in true gossip's fashion, I had better go on, and instead of leaping 3 years, I will be content to pass to the next summer, the summer of 1778. That is nearly 23 years ago. 23 years ago. Was that 1801? Chapter 8. It's on page 64. I think next time we'll read Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. Actually, Chapter 9 is very long. Chapter 8 is 10 pages. And Chapter 9 is 15 pages. Actually, it's not that bad. It's only 25 pages. I lied. 25 pages is not bad. Okay. Until tomorrow.